Hi, my name is Laura Corradi and I'm an editor for Nature Communications. And today I'm at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory for the Symposium on Brain and Body Physiology. And I'm really happy to have a chat with Dr. Erica Sloan from Monash University in Australia. So welcome, Erica.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So maybe you can give us some background about your research and also how you ended up choosing this field.
I think the field chose me a little bit. The week I started my PhD, I also took my first yoga class. And as my PhD progressed, and so did my stress levels, I sort of had this sense that yoga was good for me and that it was probably stopping me having a complete meltdown during my PhD. And so that kind of triggered this interest in how our view of the world and our stress levels impact our health. And so that really took me first into looking at how the fight or flight response mediated through the sympathetic nervous system affects viral progression. And I started that for my postdoc. And then through the work that I did during my postdoc, mapping neural circuits in lymph nodes and looking at how that affects viruses, I started getting interested in wondering how that would affect cancer. And so that's led to what my lab studies now.
Nice, I should have tried yoga during my PhD as well, probably. So you gave this wonderful talk about stress and cancer. Maybe you can summarize the main points of your findings.
So some of our findings, we started looking at how stress affects cancer cells because that seemed like the most obvious thing to look at. There was evidence from human studies and from mouse studies that maybe stress accelerated cancer progression, and we were curious about how it did that. And so we started looking at the cancer cells and found that they become more invasive when they respond to sympathetic signaling. And then we also began wondering about the tumor microenvironment. So we started looking at immune cells and vasculature, and there are responses to both. So there are direct effects on immune cells in a way that stops macrophages or dendritic cells becoming antigen presenting, and also suppressing T cells that would otherwise be protective. And then there are effects on the vasculature that not only provide more pathways for tumour cells to escape when they become more invasive, but also then indirect effects where the vasculature changes the microenvironment in a way that also impairs immune cells. So I think some of the power of this stress response is that it's not just acting on one cell type within a tumour, but acting on the tumour cells, vasculature, immune cells, all of which converges to make the tumours progress more rapidly.
Nice. So basically the stress is suppressing our immune responses, but is it only during cancer or in general during our daily life?
So we've heard a lot at this meeting from others about how it has effects on immune response anyway. But you can imagine if a cancer is starting to grow, then we would really like the immune response to be active.
Yes.
And so you're absolutely right. We're not just studying the stress of a cancer diagnosis or treatment, which both are very stressful events, but how chronic stress throughout our life can suppress our immune response and also act directly on tumour cells.
So you were saying that stress impacts the cancer when it's already developed and is already in metastasis, right? But is it doing something for the increased risk of stress of cancer development, so prior to the disease?
So there is some evidence from epidemiological studies that in some cancer types there may be an increased risk of cancer, and certainly for hereditary cancers that it may accelerate it. But probably the strongest effect seems to be once we have cancer, can that cancer spread? And of course it depends on cancer types, and we're talking about cancer in the body here rather than brain cancer. We're talking about how tumours that are in the body, such as breast cancer or lung cancer, may be accelerated, and some of that effect seems to be by helping tumour cells undergo something which is called EMT, so epithelial mesenchymal transition, where those cells become more invasive and so can spread more easily.
And how much you think is important to have the basic understanding of brain and body physiology, as we are learning in this meeting, to then translate it into a disease like cancer?
So the cancer field, looking at neurons and how they interact with cancer is relatively new. There's an increasing number of people looking at that question. And what we're really just starting to think about is not just how neurons in the body project into the tumour, which is in the body, such as a breast cancer, but also how that then maps to the brain, and then how the brain responds and signals. And I guess my work has been more focused on how neurons that start in the brainstem, sympathetic neurons, then project and innervate tumours. They also innervate other organs in the body, and so it's possible that sympathetic nerves, for example, in bone marrow, modulate the immune response that then modulates the tumour. So yeah, I think those circuits are something that we're only just starting to get an idea about and starting to map, and that will be very important.
Nice. Yeah, I think this meeting is perfect to learn more about exactly this. And in your research, you also showed that beta blockers that can have a ameliorative effect for metastasis. So how this works, and what did you find in your research?
Yeah. We were interested in beta blockers initially as a tool. So beta blockers were developed, they're drugs, cardiac drugs, they were developed in the 60s. They're used quite widely to treat hypertension and other cardiovascular disorders, heart failure. And we were interested in them as a tool to block the sympathetic neurotransmitter norepinephrine binding to receptors either on the tumour cells or on the immune cells. But they also offer a potential way to fairly rapidly translate these findings, because if we could give them to cancer patients, possibly alone, but more likely in combination with existing cancer treatments, then they offer, potentially a way not just to make the patient feel better by reducing anxiety, but also plausibly to stop the cancer from spreading. So we've done a number of studies in retrospective cohorts, sort of going back to look at data either from hospitals or from population databases. And in those studies, we can see that if a patient was taking a beta blocker at the time of diagnosis because they had some sort of cardiovascular disorder, then it was far less likely that the cancer would then spread. And then since then, we've also done a prospective study, not in combination with cancer treatment, but just as a patient was diagnosed with breast cancer, they received either a beta blocker or placebo. And we saw that in the patients that were given the beta blocker, the tumour cells had a genetic signature which suggested they were far less likely to spread. So this is consistent with this idea that beta blockers may be able to be used to stop those tumour cells disseminating, and so to stop cancer relapse.
This is really promising for clinical research. But you did this in triple negative breast cancer, right?
That's right.
So do you think this can be used also for other cancers that communicate with the nervous system?
Yeah, so it is quite likely that there's evidence that sympathetic nervous system signalling through beta adrenoreceptors accelerates pancreatic cancers, hematopoietic tumours. Some of the work we've done recently is looking at chemotherapy drugs and looking at, we found that anthracyclines they had this neuroactive property. They were able to promote sympathetic signalling within the tumour. And so they were particularly sensitive to blocking by beta blockers. And so it's possible that other cancer types, in addition to triple negative breast cancer, that are treated with anthracycline chemotherapy might be sensitive to blocking this fight or flight response signalling.
Okay, nice, interesting. And for the future, which are your plans on the stress cancer research?
Yeah, so there's a lot of exciting results coming out of studies of the immune response, and we know that the immune response is incredibly important if a patient is going to respond, whether it's chemotherapy, immunotherapy, they need a really robust immune response. So I think it's important that we really understand how these neural signaling affects that. And I think the other vulnerable patient population that we really need to help are those who already have advanced disease. So patients where it's already spread. And so very important to understand how neural networks in metastatic target organs are being influenced, how they're influencing metastasized tumour, and how we can target that.
Yes, this is will be, of course, super important for future studies. And thank you very much, Erica, for this chat and for joining this amazing symposium.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.